The next thing I want to talk about, sort of switching gears, is the symbols that you're going to find. Symbols. You know, there are a lot of symbols in algebra that you're going to learn. Parentheses we're going to get into, and all these things that look foreign, and that's why it scares a lot of people. But we'll break it down one step at a time. So let's go with the super basics, the thing that you already understand. Let's talk about the equal sign. You know, I like to talk about things that everybody understands. All right, so that's, and it's something you have to understand. So the equal sign, there you go. It's a symbol that you've used all your life. How would you use an equal sign? I mean, you know the answer to this, but you could say something silly like 2 is equal to 2. You know, that's your first equation written right there on the board. It's a silly equation. It doesn't really mean anything. All it says is if I have 2 jelly beans over here, that's exactly equivalent to, you know, this other bucket with 2 jelly beans. So if I have 2 jelly beans here and 2 jelly beans here, those are equivalent number of beans. That's what it's saying. Everything on this side of the equal sign has to be equal to what's on the other side of the equal sign. So that's really simple. But let's talk about something that you may not have seen. You can also say something like 3 is not equal to 2. Now this symbol is an equal sign with a slash through it, and that just simply means that the 2 sides are not equal. It's exactly what you might expect. The 3 jelly beans over here is not equal to the 2 that I have in my other hand. All right? And then finally, we need to spend a little bit of time talking about greater than and less than, which I know you've seen before, but I'm going to hopefully make it really easy to understand. We can write something down. Let me draw a little line to kind of divide it off here. We can write something down like this. The number 2 is less than the number 3. And you know, all right, you all know that the number 2 is less than 3, but we need to use our symbols to write that mathematically. Because the math is basically describing what we know to be true. And as you build your skills, you'll be able to solve problems that you can't do in your head. So we have to make sure we understand everything. 2 is less than 3. How do you read this? This little symbol here, you probably see it in your book. It's called the less than symbol. Less than symbol. And then if you flip it around, and we will here in a second, you'll call it the greater than symbol. So let's do that right now. Let's say the number 5 is greater than the number 1, which I know that you all know to be true. And we say that this symbol is the greater than symbol. It's the greater than symbol, which is exactly true. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's the deal. I want you to not worry too much about these guys as far as being separate symbols. You know, a lot of books will say, here's the less than symbol, and here's the greater than symbol. Here's, you know, you need to use them whenever you need to use them. I prefer to teach you that whenever you're comparing two things, just take this arrow and point it always to the smaller number. I'm going to say that 2 more times to make sure you understand it. Always point that arrow to the smaller number. Always point that arrow to the smaller number, Because that's really what the symbol means, really. It's an arrow, and so the smaller side of this arrow, the side that comes to a tiny little point, should always be next to the smaller thing. The bigger part of the arrow, the part of the arrow that's big and fat, should always be next to the bigger thing. So you see the arrow is always pointing to the smaller thing here. It's pointing to 2 because that's smaller. And here the arrow is pointing to 1, which is smaller. So yes, you could say they're separate symbols because they point different ways, but really it's just one symbol. It's an arrow. And the arrow points always to the smaller number. So in this case, we have the arrow pointing to the smaller number as well. And so try not to think of these things as 2 separate symbols that you have to memorize them. Try to think of them as just an arrow that points to the smaller number. And then so when you do that, the bigger part of that arrow is going to point to the bigger number, or be next to the bigger number. And when you read it, you just read it just like you would in a sentence. 5 is greater than 1, 2 is less than 3, and that's how it comes about. Now, you can also do some interesting things with these things that you're going to need to understand. And so it's sort of building upon greater than less than, so we're going to do that now. What I'm going to do, I talked in the beginning of the course that the word variable scares a lot of people. All right. So what I need to do now is sort of introduce that just to sort of teach you a little bit more about how to graph these inequalities here on the number line and introduce the number line, which is half the reason we're teaching this section here. So think of if you don't know the answer to a problem, you know, when you're younger and you're adding up jelly beans, you know, You're just basically counting them and you arrive at the answer. When you get up into algebra and beyond, when you don't know the answer to something, you assign it a letter. And that letter is just something you don't know the answer to it. It's called a variable. It's just a letter that just represents whatever the answer happens to be. And that's a variable. So when you solve your equations later on in the class, you're just going to solve for the answer to that problem. It's going to be the answer to that variable. Now here I'm going to introduce a variable x. You're going to see the letter x used a lot because it just happens that algebra uses the letter x to represent the variable most of the time. It's a letter of the alphabet. You've seen the letter x all your life. Don't be worried about it. It's just an unknown value of something. So if I had something like x is greater than or equal to 6, I would write it like that. Now this symbol looks very, very similar to this symbol, but there's a difference. This one has a line underneath it. This one has a line underneath it. And that line is basically telling you that whatever x is, it's got to be greater than 6, but it can also be equal to 6. That's what the line under there means. If there's no line, then it's just, if you're just looking at it like that, it's just x is greater than 6. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. That's what x could be. But if you make it greater than or equal to 6, then x can be everything including 6. So in this case, x is greater than or equal to 6 is how you read it. And the answer would be that x is equal to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, on and on and on, if we're talking about integers here. So x is greater than or equal to 6. So it's basically including 6 because of the equal sign. That's why we list it. And then every number bigger than that because we're talking about numbers bigger than 6. Now, just to give you another little example, if you have y is less than or equal to 3, right? That's the way you read it. Less than or equal to. That's the way you write that. Then y is going to be equal to 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2, ... Because basically it's equal to 3. Y can be equal to 3, but it can also be equal to 2, to 1, to 0, -1. You keep going less and less and less. And so when you think about it, if you get less than 0, you're going to be going into the realm of the negative numbers, which is what we talked about. So that is the symbols I wanted to show you. We have the simple equal sign, we have when two things are not equal, and we have greater than and less than, which are exactly the same thing. You just point the arrow to the smaller number. And then we have greater than equal to, less than or equal to. And in these cases, you're basically trying to express a whole range of numbers, either bigger or smaller than the number you have. And if there's a bar under it, it includes that number. And if there's no bar listed here, well, then you wouldn't include that number. That's really all that means.